Hi guys, this is Mike Hibbert back with another Python Django tutorial for you, and this time we're going to discuss the use of a Python module called Fabric in deploying our Django project. Now, in the last two tutorials we've been deploying our Django app to Heroku, and we've done that all pretty much by hand, and as a result we've left open for quite a few errors in the deployment system because there's a lot of things to remember. Hence, we had two over half-hour videos that covered a lot of details. Now, that's obviously asking for trouble. If you're going to deploy applications in a professional way, then you want as little thing as possible to go wrong. And throughout this tutorial I'll show you a couple of things that actually went wrong during the previous tutorials and demonstrate how you can stop that from happening. Now, the first thing we need to know to use Fabric is obviously how do we actually get it onto our system so we can use it. Now, the first thing is just to install it using pip from the command line, and we just basically say pip install Fabric. And that should install a few modules for us. It will install Fabric, Paramiko, and PyCrypto. And Paramiko and PyCrypto are used for creating secure connections to remote servers when you're deploying. Now, in the case of our particular setup, we don't need that because we've got the Heroku and system, and we've also got Git, where we're deploying to Heroku through using Git instead. So we don't need that part of that, but we do need the Fabric part of things. So we're going to deal mostly in running local commands and not SSH commands or secure shell commands across the internet on remote servers. We're going to keep it simple and use the command line on the local machine to just get everything done that way. So once we've installed that, we need to create a config file for it. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to create a fab file .py, and this is basically just a bog standard Python file that we're going to import a module in, and we're going to write some functions, and the functions that we write in here will then become things that we can name in our command line arguments to run a program called fab, because Fabric has a command line function we can call fab, and then, for instance, if we had a function inside of our fab file, we could say, if it was called deploy, we could say fab deploy, and it would go into the fab file, look for the deploy function, and run that function. So this is how we automate some of the functions inside of the fab file. So let's have a look at what we need to put in the fab file first, and this will all kind of make more sense later on when we actually start to run the commands. So the first thing we need to do is to import a command that lets us run local commands through the shell. So that basically is from Fabric's API, import local. Local is just a function, a Python function that knows how to create a shell and how to run a command line program. Right, so got that imported. Now we need to use it. Now I'm going to show you three different three different functions that we're going to use this local command with. The first one being our backup command, because we want to be able to automate our backup system to make sure that we actually can keep our code safe in our Bitbucket repository, which is what I'm using currently. Now, to do that, we use the local command like this. We say local git pull. Now, the reason why we would say that is because if we are on a team project where there's more than one developer, somebody else may have committed code into the repository before us, so we want to be able to make sure that we've got the most current copy before we actually push anything in there. And then we run the local command git add period. And that basically adds any of the files that we might have created, and in addition any changed files will be included as well. Then the next thing we do is we print out enter your commit comment, because obviously we have to do a commit command to Git, and from there we use the raw input function, which is a basic function that comes with all Python, to create a comment variable. So it will come up on the command line with this message, enter your commit comment here. We'll type in our commit comment, it'll put it into this variable and then supply it to the next function call, which is local git commit -m, and we're going to embed the string comment inside of there, and then that should work fine. And then finally we do a git push. So we push our code, and that will then back up our code into Bitbucket or into Git or wherever else you're hosting it. So that's how we get our backup command to work. So if we go to the command line, when we type fab backup, that should then go into our fab file, find this backup function and run all of these commands inside of there. And that will then automate the backup process for us. So it makes it much simpler. We don't have to remember these commands. We don't need to remember the process. We just basically run fab backup and it automates that for us. Very simple. And also removes the possibility for us to start making mistakes. The only mistakes we could make are whatever mistakes we make inside of our fab file. So if we don't make mistakes in the fab file, everything's fine. And that's the famous last words. So the next part is we're going to define a helper function here, which is called switch debug. Now it has two arguments, what to change and change to. So we want to basically change a setting that we discussed in the last tutorial. Now, do you remember that we have in our local settings.py file a line that says debug equals true? Now, do you also remember that when we deploy our static files to S3, we had to set that setting to false to trick the system into thinking that it needed to use the S3 storage system to then upload through to S3. Now, it would be nice if we didn't have to remember to do that. It would be nice if we just basically made the script do that work for us. So this is what our function here, switch debug, is actually going to do. So we have what to change, which is the true or false setting, and what it is currently, and what to change to, or change it to another setting. So in the first instance, when we call it, we'll tell it to look for the word true in this string and change it to false, and that then should then make it so that we can actually then run further commands, that like the collect static command, and that will deploy to S3 for us during our deployment stages. So to do that, we first run the local command, copy the local settings.py file through to a backup version. Then we create a string called sed, because this is going to be a sed command through the command line, and we're going to say sed go and look for this pattern here and replace it with this pattern here. Now you notice we've put these percentage strings in here because those are going to be replaced by these two variables here, what to change and change to. And we're going to do that command on the backup version of this local settings. And the reason for that is because we use a pipe, and when we use a pipe it will create a blank version of local settings.py. It'll be empty, there'll be nothing in there. So we need to run this sed command on the backup version, which contains the current version, current settings, and then once it does that replacement of those two items, it'll pipe what's left or what's changed rather, through to our local settings.py, which is currently empty but will become filled with the brand new updated text. And then it will save that, and then we'll have our local settings re-edited, and then it should contain the updated string. So to do that, we take the string that we've created here and we do a local command on this string using the replacement of these two variables into this string, which should then create whatever command we need. We're going to use this function to set it to true, but we're also going to use this function to set it to false as well, because this is just basically a helper function. It does two things that it needs to do. It can set it to false or true for us, and that will help us to make it much more simple. So the next step is to actually use the switch debug function in our deployment function, because we've got our backup, which basically backs up the code, but we've also got our deployment. But before we do that, just forgot there, we just need to remove the backup version of the local settings file just before we move on, because I don't want various files just hanging around on the system. So right, okay, here's our deploy function. You'll notice there's no arguments to these functions except for our switch debug, which is a helper. So normal functions for Fabric wouldn't necessarily have any arguments, not in our case anyway. So the first thing we want to do is we want to do a command called pip freeze. Now what does pip freeze do? Well, what it does is it calls the pip function, Python packaging function, and it creates something like this. So creates a nice list of what the current dependencies are within this virtual environment. So it goes and it lists that we need Django, Fabric, South, Whoosh, Boto, Coverage, all the modules that we've installed in previous tutorials for this particular environment. So that's nice and handy, because one of the things that Heroku needs you to do is it needs to specify a file called requirements.txt. Now this is one of the steps that we missed out in the previous tutorial, and this demonstrates really how complex deployment is and how much we need to actually make it as error-free as possible, because doing that by hand, even I forgot some of the steps. So the way that we stop that from happening is to use our brain and to get the computer to think these things through and do the steps for us, so that we don't have to remember them every single time. One of the main things that you'll learn as a programmer is to minimize the amount of things that you have to remember to get your job done, because programming is all about storing information in your head, and the less you have to remember, the less problems and less bugs you'll create. So this is one way that we'll stop doing that. So we're going to generate a list of requirements into a requirements.txt file using our pip freeze command line, and we're going to pipe it through into there, and that will create our requirements.txt file. When we do our deployment, or we do our git push to Heroku, Heroku will notice that file, look through it and say and ask itself, do I have any of these modules installed? And if not, it'll go and install them, and it'll do that automatically because of the file being there in the system. So the next thing to do is do another pull from the code revision, because obviously with it being a deployment we want the most up-to-date copy. Then we add whatever files we might have added. Again, we get another commit comment and we push, so we back up just temporarily. So this is a push firstly through to our our main repository, which is on Bitbucket, but we're going to do a push in a minute through to Heroku also. But firstly, we're going to use our switch debug function. So we're going to say switch true to false in our local settings.py file. Then we're going to run the local command python manage.py collect static, and because that setting is now false, it should then push all of our files through to S3 automatically for us. Once it's done that, we come back and we use the function again, but this time we switch what is currently false through to true. So that returns us back to a debug state so that we can continue developing on our machine. So we don't have to remember those things. The script will do that for us, and thus reducing the amount of things we need to remember, and thus making our lives much easier and less bug filled. The next step of this is something new. Now, this is a command that Heroku has in its API. If I just show you what it does on the command line, we have our normal website, and if I run Heroku maintenance :on, enabling maintenance mode for Django tutorials, done. So what we get when we actually visit the site is this. So we've basically blocked anybody out whilst we're actually doing our update. It's not ideal, and some website developers prefer not to have maintenance downtime, but as far as I'm concerned, I've seen people like Google do it. I've seen other people like goodness knows, there are lots and lots of large companies that do it this way, and you know, if it's unavoidable, then you have to go down for maintenance. There's no way you can get around that. If there is a better way to do it, then do it, but most users aren't really that upset if they're out, kept out of the website for a few seconds whilst you update the code and solve some problems. So that's what that Heroku command does. And 3 guesses what happens when you do Heroku maintenance :off. When we go back to the site, everything's live again. So we're going to include that in our update, and the reason why that we're going to do that is because whilst we're pushing our code through to Heroku, we don't want anybody using the site or putting information in the database or anything like that, or uploading files that might screw things up and give us even more problems. So we use the Heroku maintenance :on command. We run it locally because we want it running our local command line shell. And next we do our git push Heroku, which will now include our requirements text, and the requirements text will be uploaded, and then Heroku will examine any new changes. It'll start off the code, it'll go through the requirements and see, have I got any of these modules, and install them if need be. The next thing we do is we use Heroku run to run a Python command on the remote server. So then we use python manage migrate to implement any south migrations that we might have created in the process. And then finally end it all by going Heroku maintenance off. And that should be enough to actually deploy our site. So we've done a requirements generation, we've committed it back to our main repository just to store it and keep it safe. We have collected our static files and put them all on S3, and we have also put the site into maintenance mode, then pushed our code, and then finally pulled it out of maintenance mode, ready for people to continue using. So we've done all of those steps, and I think we're good to go. So let's just go back to our command line here. So we need to go fab backup, which is one of our commands. That's this one at the top. just to test whether it works. And it did 5 minutes ago, so I'm hoping it's still going to work now. Testing fabric. So there you go. Very good. So it's automated the whole thing. All we had to type, other than our commit comment, was fab backup. So that's automated our backup or our version control. We can now do fab deploy. So it does our pip freeze, creates the requirements text, pulls from Git, adds any currently created files, and then it's asking us for a comment. So testing fabric again, because I'm feeling creative with my commit messages today. Okay, so nothing to commit. Right, I don't know. Touch. Let's just do a little quick edit to this file just to make it so that it's different and so that there's actually something to commit. Testing fabric. Okay, so there. Right, it's noticed there's something different, so it's fine with that. Okay, so now it goes through and does the local commands for the changes. So this is our, I've forgotten the name of the function, switch debug function committing. So that's this bit here. So it's telling us that it's actually done that. Then it's run the collect static command, and now it's just saying, are you sure you want to do this? Yeah, we are. Let's go. Quite happy with that. Then it does the switch back of the debug setting, and then puts Heroku into a maintenance on state, and then now we're actually pushing through to Heroku. Hopefully that's not going to take forever. Nope. So it's detected that we've got a Python app. So now it's looking through the requirements text, and it's noticed that we've got all the modules there because I've already run this command previously. But in here it would say detected fabric, it would say detected Paramiko, whatever modules, and you would actually see it building in the list. And then finally it checks through our Heroku proc file just to see what kind of application we've declared, and then hopefully that should be compiled. So it's compiled our virtual machine on Heroku and is launching it. And there we go, all done. Yes, now we've got the migrate that's running, and that's fine. All done, automated it, and all we had to type was fab deploy in the end. So if we in future make any more changes, to schema and use south migrations or anything like that, from now on we don't have to remember all the complex steps. All we have to do is type fab deploy, and that's awesome. Like I say, the least amount of things that you have to remember in your job as a programmer actually makes you less likely to create bugs, because you have less things whizzing around your head and you can focus on the task of actually creating functionality rather than actually getting yourself into difficult situations. So that's the end of the tutorial. I hope that you enjoyed that, and I hope that you learned some valuable information from that. And if you did, then please click the like button. If you want to know more about tutorials in the series and get a notification when the next ones are out, then please click the subscribe button and we'll send you a message as soon as that happens. Okay, thanks for watching.